This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs to create extraordinary success.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm Justin, and my typical co-host Elise is not here. Obviously, she's down in Mexico with Deepak Chopra this week. So as she enjoys her stay down there working with one of the legends in the space, she's obviously going to bring a whole bunch of information back to us. But while we wait for Elise to come back, I was like, you know what? I just have to go get somebody equally as intelligent and spend time with somebody equally as smart. And so I went out and found Dr. Andy Galpin, who's the assistant professor at Cal State Fullerton, and really doing some amazing work when it comes to performance and the way in which he's able to make the complex simple and understand these concepts in a very personalized way, not just for athletes, but for people in general. And having a heavy understanding of that mind-body connection that we always speak of here at Own It is that inner-outer energy. And so without further ado, Dr. Andy Galpin, thank you so much for being here with us today.
So what you're really trying to tell me is I'm kind of the backup fill-in?
No, you are.
God, our regular co-host going to be here, so let's just get some schmuck we can find and pull him in. That's hey, I accept my position. I own that position. I own that position. I'm happy to be there.
The best thing is I chose to be here.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for you. So with how far you've come and all of your work that you've ultimately put out when it comes to performance, all of the athletes that you've run into, what is the biggest thing that gets misconstrued, misunderstood in most commonly in your mind?
With regard to professional athletes, some of the things that are jumping to front of mind are simply that they do things from the preparation side much differently than everyone else. So you would assume that their nutrition is just outstanding. You would assume that their sleep is incredible. You would assume that they train perfectly and very hard. And that's just absolutely not the case. It is sometimes, but it's many times not. So I would say that is something people really struggle to understand. And especially when you first start working with professional athletes, is you just sort of expect to have to come in guns blazing with the best you have, the highest tech stuff, the most advanced things. And a lot of times it's still just very, very basic stuff.
Just even hearing that is so sometimes comforting for the general population or people within our audience within that entrepreneurship space, because you're like, oh, I've got to be perfect. I have to change everything. I've got to do something to the nth degree because that's how the best are doing it. And as you're saying, that's just simply not true. And so that's what I love about your work so much is you bring this level of practicality to it that quite frankly often gets misunderstood and oftentimes overlooked. Where did your journey begin and how did you find this love for this industry and end up doing things so differently?
Well, I would say mine probably started pretty similarly to how most academics in the sports science field were, in that I was an athlete my entire life, but I was not good enough, but not bad enough either. So the incentives were aligned perfectly because I realized very quickly if I do things more effectively, then that translated to a difference. So I wasn't so good that it just didn't matter how I trained. Or just didn't matter. It did, right? That's the difference between being able to go to play and playing college football or not, or being able to, win awards or just be a starter or all these things, right? Also, wasn't so bad where it's like, hey, it doesn't matter what you do, you're never going to play at the next level. So I was in that perfect spot where, I wanted to get better, and I grew up in a environment, both in my family and a local community, that you're responsible for everything effectively. Losing was always okay, but it wouldn't be comprehended by somebody I grew up with that you didn't work as hard as you possibly could. Why would you not do every single, it wouldn't compute with the people I grew up with. And so keeping that same thing, sort of like, well, why would I I couldn't understand why you would do this. I mean, especially when I got to college, I did not get along with any of my teammates, hardly any of them. Like, I just could not understand why you wouldn't take as much information in as you could for sleep, for training, for hydration, for all these things. Like, I just didn't understand it. Like, why aren't they watching extra film? Like, why are you not going to things? Why are you not studying this stuff? I didn't get it at all. I probably never will. So that's why those incentives mattered. And because of that, I just had a thirst for that type of knowledge. And so it didn't take me very long to realize that at some level, the rest of my life, I wanted to spend working with professional athletes. And I also grew up in a household where my parents were very, very clear in their wishes for me, such that they didn't want me to do what they had to do. And they didn't care what I did or how I did it or anything else or how much money I made or what field I went into. None of that mattered. But they were very clear, like, you're not going to do what we do. You're not going to do this for a living. You're going to have an actual life. So I knew I wanted to do something that allowed me to live a lifestyle that was full of autonomy and it wasn't so difficult health-wise and physically. So I could enjoy my life. So those two things combined, the translation is they gave me ambition and hard work. So I dreamed big and I worked really hard, and that's how I got here.
On your journey to Fullerton, and what really propelled your interest to dive into some of the bioenergetics that you ended up truly like owning in that space?
Yeah, sure. When I graduated college, I was in an area where my degree was in exercise science, but there was nobody in that program that really knew anything about, frankly, exercise. It was really public health kind of things, and that's just what was there. And so I knew always, like, that was not the part of this field I was interested in. So longer story condensed, I was able to get a position in Arizona, an internship at a place called Athletes Performance. Now, this is 20 years ago, and at the time, they were the first true elite facility that had physical therapy, strength and conditioning, nutrition, chiropractic, all this in one house. So it was a hotbed of athletes in Arizona that were coming down and just basically living there. And you walk in and your PT and your food and just all this is in one facility. It's morphed since then into exos, and they've kind of left the athlete space for the most part. They really launched corporate wellness as a thing, or the big four ones there. But I was working with professional athletes. I was working with Hall of Famers and probably 16 or 17 first round draft picks in the NFL, right out the gates. These are the people I'm working with. So I realized, okay, there's that high level athletics, but I don't know, man. I just realized, like, full-time strength conditioning wasn't going to be my jam. I wanted to know more. Like, I understand when you do this many reps per set, you get X adaptation. And when you do this many reps per set, you get Y adaptation. But it never sat right in my mind, like, why is that actually happening? What's the truth here? It can't be specific to 5. How does your body know that 5 does this and 7 does that? That can't make any sense. There has to be something going on different internally that's causing a different stimulus. And these numbers are just a way to activate something. That's the only answer. And I felt like if you could get back to the true answer, then you wouldn't be held to memorizing methodologies. You would truly understand cause and effect, and then you could do whatever method you want as long as it elicited that specific cause. You would get your outcome. So that's really what it came down to. So from there, I was like, okay, and I got exposed. I was very fortunate to get exposed to somebody. I basically went to an NSCA conference, and I had no bearing of what was going on there. I'd never seen any type of performance related research. I'd never been around anything like that. I didn't know what a master's degree was. I could not have told you the difference between a master's and a PhD. I promise you, I had no idea. And I just remember walking around and reading these research posters, and I saw one guy who was doing muscle biopsies. And I was like, well, that's cool. I know you can even do that. In fact, I remember being taught that you can't do that. It's like, oh, it's super damaging and causes tons of scar tissue and the athletes never recover. And I saw that. I was like, what, you could do that shit? Huh. And he was doing it before and after, doing like 10 sets of 1 at 100% of your max back squats. And you do that every day for like 13 days. And I was like, and then he had another one where he was doing squats, heavy squats with bands and chains. And I was like, I've been doing that. Like I started experimenting. I've been squatting with bands and chains, and I'm like, I'm taking biopsies and looking at cell signal. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, why did no one ever tell me this existed? I had no concept. So I talked to that guy for a bunch of hours, and eventually ended up getting my master's degree from him. So I moved out to Memphis, and I did that. And then to finish up the story, I finished that program, and I still thought, okay, I know I wasn't like a highly qualified strength conditioning coach, but I just say, like, I get that field. It makes intuitive sense in a lot of realms for me to strength conditioning. So I felt like I don't know everything there, but I picked things up very quickly, and I'm generally ahead of the curve of everyone that I was around at that time. So I felt like spending more time learning strength conditioning wouldn't have closed the biggest gap I had in my knowledge base. And so I was like, let me go the opposite direction, and let me go to some field I have no education in and dive hard into. And all the people I was around weren't doing that. Everyone wanted to go and do more internships with strength conditioning coaches, or start working with athletes. And I was like, why don't I go get a PhD in muscle biochemistry? Because who's going to have that skill set? Who's going to understand strength conditioning like I do, and muscle physiology? And I didn't see anyone. I was never seeing anyone doing type of work like that. And I thought I would have a real niche, and I could create I could carve out a career where I would do things and be able to have things that no one else can really do. So I spent over 4 years doing stuff that I wasn't really like super actually interested in, working with older individuals and aerobic stuff. In the lab I was in, they didn't know anything about strength conditioning. They didn't care. In fact, they generally had disdain for the field, still do. But I was like, I'm learning skills, and I'm learning tactics and technical knowledge here that no one else from the strength conditioning field really understands. So then when I got out and I started looking for jobs, I was like, hey, I have these two unique skill sets. I can do this type of research, but on this type of performance model. And from there, I also knew, like, I'm going to have a leg up if I want to go back and work with athletes, because no one can hang with me who works with athletes. No one can hang with me in terms of understanding muscle physiology. And I don't know as much about actually coaching as these high-level coaches, but the point is there's some opening here that no one else can fill. So that's really how I got interested in it all, and kind of how I built this space that I'm in right now, in this career that really didn't exist before me.
I love it because I relate so heavily to what you said when it comes to, like, there has to be more. On my journey, having gone through a similar path, getting your master's degree in exercise physiology, understanding the components of strength conditioning, performance, and then diving into the realm of functional medicine is kind of the route I went after postgraduate, is there has to be more. And you said something of cause and effect, or root cause, where it's not just, oh, this is going to cause this adaptation, memorize it, and just go start doing the act. Just go to bed 10 minutes earlier every single night for 5 nights, and you can start to change circadian rhythm. Stay consistent with your sleep time, or cut blue light out, or drink half your body weight in ounces, or whatever it might be that is being thrown out there as a term. But why? There has to be more information. There has to be a better understanding as to what this is, so that it's not the science, because we as people are not rats. We're not lab monkeys that are simply going to react the same as a clinical setting. We're human beings in an ever-changing world, and an ever-changing ecosystem that we need to be able to balance off of. And if we understand why certain things are happening, we're going to be able to implement them or take action on a much greater level. And so I want to kind of transition a little bit into the talk about, like, the gut biome and brain axis that is so heavily discussed and spoken about today. And in your work, when you've started to dive into, like, the bioenergetics of muscular tissue and the connection that happens between gut brain axis and the types of food we're eating, and the place that we're kind of going through as an economy right now, especially in the types of food that we have access to, how does that impart energy utilization, chronic health, long-term energy, long-term wellness?
Well, a couple of thoughts come to my head when you bring those questions up. First is I'm no huge fan of functional medicine. In fact, I've been quite critical of it for many, many years. Um, they did several things very poorly, and I think they missed the boat massively in a number of areas. But having said that, it's clearly a movement that needed to happen. It absolutely needed to be there. And they have and continue to push the pace in a number of things that I think are actually generally good. And the gut microbiome is a perfect example of that. So if you asked folks about the microbiome 8 years ago, functional medicine people would have been talking about how important it is. And the rest of the field would have been said that that's all garbage. That's a lie. That's quackery. That's non-science based. Well, it turns out those dudes are right. Right? Like they weren't right on the exact things. Maybe this is not a perfect metric of it. And maybe you can't just take a poop sample and understand them. And maybe, yes. All those are problems. And some of those are still problems. Having said that, they told you it was important. You said they were wrong. They were right. And maybe we should just give some people a little more grace in saying, I know that there is perfect science in these areas yet, but there's clearly something here and people need action now. And as long as you're not selling people things like this is going to cure your cancer, this is disease diagnosis, this is disease prevention, that this is uncertain, we don't know exactly, the science is shaky or completely lost, but this is my best guess. As long as you're accurately portraying the science, my problem in those areas is when those don't happen. Again, you're selling false hope. You're selling scientific confidence that truly isn't there. Look, people hire you for your personal opinion. So I have no problem people saying, hey, look, I think you should do blah, 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 blah. Just don't conflate that with saying the science is super clear of saying blah, 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 because that's a different thing, in my opinion, especially when you're a scientist. So I generally don't speak in public, 1 or 2% of some of the things I'll actually do in private, simply because I know as a scientist, my opinion carries heavier weight for right or wrong reasons, but that's simply true. The DR in front of my name carries more weight than a strength coach or a functional medicine practitioner who's a former acupuncturist or something. So I'm very, very careful. I tend to not put things out in public until they at least have a reasonable scientific base. Now, if an athlete asks me something private, I would say, yeah, we don't know, blah, blah, but here's what I think there's some initial evidence that can do this. Now, some of my colleagues are more quick to recommend things that are based on animal models or cell culture. I almost never do. You'll almost never see me recommend anything unless it has strong human support. But it doesn't mean I don't do it in the background, right? Because again, when you don't have options, it's sort of like, well, maybe we should try this. There's reasonable evidence to think it may work. We don't know, but we don't have any room to think it's detrimental either. So the gut microbiome is, again, it's just another example of that. And so I think it's just extremely clear the importance of the gut microbiome and overall performance and health. It's a bit of a missing field still. There's muckery about in the good and bad ways, but you simply can't deny its relevance to performance anymore.
I completely agree with you, and I love the concept of what you talk about, where things have to come back to that science base and truly being rooted in science and being able to help guide. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't go and experiment, you don't go and look into things, and because if we truly waited until everything came out in a paper, we'd be light years behind.
Yeah, careers are over. It's too late.
Exactly. And so how do you become a self-experimenter? I mean, Tim Ferriss says the best and most the highest performing people are the best self-experimenters, and are able to take understanding on how things work for them, and understanding that, utilizing the information that's in the background. So where do you start leading into that level of self-experimentation and figuring out what works for you and how you can create your own change within that?
Yeah, I would say my first reaction is I don't believe what Tim said. I disagree. Like the best performers sometimes are just way better. Like they're just way better. I've been around a bunch of people who make, I could buy whole countries kind of money. And sometimes they are really dialed. Sometimes it's just like, I just wake up and I just like, that's self-experimenting anything. They're just better at something. They have a natural talent. Having said that, I do agree with this approach though. Like, yes, people should do this. It's generally going to be a good thing to try. So I would say all you have to do is understand the very basic scientific principles. For example, you need to have metrics outlined before you start your experiment. So I'm going to do this for 30 days or 6 weeks or whatever your thing is. Okay, great. What are you going to measure pre and post? You can't figure that out halfway through, right? You can't change that. It has to be a set metric, and you have to make that decision and go before enter, because if not, your internal biases are going to be too strong, and you're going to move it. You're not going to get a true final. So number one, identify your pre and post metric ahead of time. Number two, you have to change a single variable at a time. Right? If you change multiple variables, you're left in a position of not knowing, and you could foresee situations in which you change two variables. One makes you feel better, one makes you feel worse. So at the end of that 30 days, you feel the same. And you think neither of these two things work. In fact, they both worked. They both had huge effects on you. They just directly counteracted. So choose one thing at a time to work with. And then the third component of that is make sure that your pre and post measure is ideally something that is objective. It can be subjective, though. I mean, but you're going to have super biases. So in the self-experiment case, almost always choose objective measures, and something that is both valid and reliable. And just quickly on those two words, reliable means that if you took that measure 25 times in a row without changing anything, that number would stay the same. Okay, an example of that would be your body weight. If you took your body weight, stepped off the scale, stepped back on the scale, stepped off the scale, and you did that 25 times in a row, you're going to get the exact same number. That's a very reliable measure. If you do something like measure your cortisol levels, and if you did that every hour throughout the day, that's not going to be a reliable measure, because we know it changes throughout the day. So that's if you did your pre-test and you took your cortisol level at 8 in the morning, and then at the end of your 30 days, you took your cortisol level at 7 p.m. That's not reliable, because we know that those are different measures. Or your pre-measure, you took a spit test, and your post-measure, you did a urine test for cortisol. That's not the same thing. So that's not a reliable thing. And then validity means, is it actually measuring the thing it's measuring? So when you step on a scale, that number you're seeing is actually the body weight and the amount of, well, technically the amount of newtons you're putting into the earth, right? Something else is like, okay, maybe a saliva test, and that's measuring your gut microbiome. Well, that's not actually measuring the thing it's saying it's measuring. So it's not a valid measure of your gut microbiome to take a hair sample. That's just not, no matter what the company tells you, right? It's an estimate, it's a proxy. We use this to then estimate your microbiome. No, that's not a valid answer. So those are the three things I would say is choose one thing, pick measures beforehand, and then make sure that those measures are reliable and valid.
And so as you're kind of going through the self-experimentation, and we talk about ownership and taking ownership upon yourself, self-leadership, how would you suggest people start understanding, hey, I want to get more energy. I want to change the way I'm feeling. I want to optimize my health wellness in a longer way. What would be the first two things that you would start with to have the biggest impact on that for them?
You mean in terms of actual physiological variables to mess with?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that the very first one would be a tie between two things. Maybe arguably, I'll say three. And you could probably have pretty good argument between the three as to which one's number one. And that would be sleep, physical activity, and by that I truly mean exercise, and stress management. If you don't have, and I know it's super cliche, and it's just like, oh, I was hoping he was going to say like, oh, mitochondrial, but like, no, like it's not telomere length. It is, do you have a reasonable stress load management system? Do you have reasonable sleep? And then, are you exercising? And exercising is very different than physical activity. I'm a big believer in the science showing the fact that you need very hard exercise a lot as a metric of longevity. Now, me as an exercise scientist, I'm always going to argue exercise is the thing that's going to drive it the most, simply because it does the other two things. We know the relationship between stress management and exercise. When you exercise really hard, it is fantastic at reducing stress. So you already sort of taken care of that one. People who also exercise really hard tend to sleep better. So if you just train really hard, things tend to just get lined up pretty well.
I love it because especially in like our 8 controllables we talk about, and when we talk about the variable that helps us in understanding is heart rate variability. It's a big one that we've kind of leaned into and really started to look at. And obviously, and again, I'm curious to get your point, but a lot of the studies and research that I've looked at and I've read, the big 3 factors that cause the greatest impact on longevity, health, wellness is continuous blood glucose level, so steady blood glucose, higher heart rate variability based off of your understanding, and then quality of sleep. And so those 3 in conjunction together create that longevity for us in the back end. And so looking at that and understanding that the 8 controllables that we really push on hit on those 3 that you spoke about: sleep, heavy physical exercise, and a stress management plan, or something that imparts that. What have you found when it comes to that heavy physiological exercise? What are you speaking in terms of, say, a protocol? If somebody's like, okay, great, I want to now dive in, something that's going to be most effective for me to bring about this this result that I'm looking for. What is that?
Yeah. So when we talk about non-athletes and just for the sport of life, I want them to hit different nodes, and keep in mind a couple of things. These nodes don't have to be hit every single week, and you can combine multiple in a day. Okay, so it's going to sound like an impossible program, but if you do multiple in a day, you could do this theoretically, all these in working out 3 days a week. Okay, so that being said, you need to do something that makes you move fast, with the intention, at least, of trying to move fast. You don't actually have to move fast, but you have to be intending to move fast. This could be a medicine ball throw. It could be plyometrics. It could be sprint work. It could be trying to just deadlift your trap bar deadlift and trying to go as fast as possible on the way up. Not just doing whatever speed is enough to get the barbell up, but trying to and intentionally going faster. So something in that realm. You have to do something that challenges maximal or close to maximal force production. Right? Again, it doesn't have to be a true 1 rep max deadlift. Even for most people, as heavy as you can for a set of 3 to 5 is still probably good enough, or something like that. Again, I don't truly mean as heavy as actual possible, but like pretty close, right? So you got to be trying to get stronger. Number 3, you have to do something that challenges the muscle to grow. I don't mean you have to go out and be a bodybuilder or try to add as much muscle mass as possible, but some sort of training that stimulates muscle hypertrophy. You have to do some sort of training that is more akin to what people think of when they think of high intensity intervals. So something that challenges a maximum heart rate, probably over a fairly short domain, but you're going to repeat that many, many, many times. Something, the last one is, the second last one rather, is something that requires you to sustain work output for a very long time without any breaks. So this is your standard, what most people think of when they think about cardio or aerobic exercise or low intensity steady state. So something where you don't get a break for 20 to 40 minutes or more is very important. The last one being something that is probably more akin to what we call physical activity. So this is being able to walk for 5 straight hours. Yeah, maybe that's a little excessive, but like most people should be able to walk for an hour and a half. You should be able to go for a 2-hour hike without having to stop and take a bunch of breaks. You can if you want, but you shouldn't have to. So if you do all those things, you're pretty damn physiologically resilient against anything you're going to encounter. And just to finish up again, you can combine those things. So you could go to the gym on Monday. You could do 10 minutes of med ball slams and some jumping. Then you could do what we call a hypertrophic type of lift. So 3 sets of 10 at 85 or 80% or something like that of squat, bench, push, pull, hinge, these types of things. Maybe you do 3 exercises, and then you finish the day off with some high intensity intervals. Well, you just knock 3 of them out right there. You get on a Airdyne bike and you do 20 seconds as hard as you can, 40 seconds recovery. You do 5 rounds of that. Well, you could be in and out of the gym in 40 minutes easy and have 3 of those things knocked out. Maybe 1 day a week, you get your headphones on and you take all your calls while you're walking around the block for an hour. Boom, knock one of those things. So it's not really that hard to handle all these things. And again, you don't have to get them all in 1 week. So if you just think about the month, just think, okay, across this month, I'm trying to knock out all these things a couple of times each. And then you'll be totally fine.
I love it because it comes back to the intentionality of what we're doing. The intentionality of how we're moving, the intentionality of how we're sleeping, the intentionality of the habits we're engaging in every single day, the types of movement we are doing. And so I guess the big thing that you guys as listeners are coming to is the one thing Andy spoke about was the diversity of what you're getting exposed to. The larger the diversity of the stimulus, the more resilient you have to be, the harder you are to kill. It's no different than the types of food we want. We talked about it on our previous couple podcasts ago about the diversity of food you're getting. We talked about the diversity of environments you're exposed to, the diversity of stress loads that you're exposed to. Everything in this world is stress. It's just where on the scale is it? How is it impacting you? And the higher stress loads, more often you feel them paired with periods of regeneration, you're going to be more diverse to handle higher outputs after that. And it's no different from what we're talking about from our exercise component here. So again, kind of going back through those to recycle, we want to be able to move fast. We want to have a high work output. We want to have something that pushes high intensity from a cardiovascular load. We want to have something that has high force output. And then we want to have something that's more on the enjoyment, physical activity side that's a little bit more general in nature.
Yeah, and the other one that's we probably left out there was just something that requires sustained effort for a long period of time. And people tend to forget that one. It sucks, but you need to be able to sustain like decently high heart rate for a long time without a break. And that if you had to pick one of those that had the most impact on your health, you could certainly argue that would be the one.
Love it. Now, Andy, we often talk about here is, and again, it comes back to is that self-leadership, that ownership mentality, and that nobody's showing up on a horse. Nobody's showing up to take it over for you. Nobody's showing up to do it for you. It's the effort we bring. It's the connection of the mentality of how we show up. And I'd love to know from your point of view, with all the professional athletes you've worked with, the amount of research that you've done, what is your definition of living in ownership?
I don't know. I don't think I can define that. I could certainly babble on a little bit about tactics, but I don't think off the top of my head I have a strong definition of what it means for you. I mean, I could certainly talk about my beliefs on the matter, and again the tactics.
I'd love to hear it.
But that's it. I sort of started the discussion by telling you that this movement resonates strongly with me, but that's a little bit of confirmation bias, right? Because I think fortunate in growing up in an environment where this is it, like this is the thing, right? So when this started becoming popular a number of years ago, I'm like, yeah, great, I'm already bought in because this is my ethos already. So I personally think that understanding opportunity is really what ownership is. And it's the fact that when things are not the way that you want them to be, that is not a negative, that is simply an opportunity, right? So having said that, I have taught many classes for many, many, many years, and the ownership thing doesn't work with everyone. It's not even close, right? So you have to be careful. If someone can take criticism and they can see that as an opportunity to improve, then ownership works very well for them. But if they see that as a detriment to their self-worth, they're not ready to deal with ownership, right? So we have to break that bridge first, right? And what I mean by that is, if I sit down a graduate student and tell them, your experiment sucks, you're doing a terrible job, you're not someone I want around all these things, right? I could have one grad student who'd be like, awesome, this is an opportunity to improve. I know I have clarity of what I need to do now. Great, like I'm going to be better at the end of this. The same thing happens when we run the analytics of an athlete and we get the results back, right? And we're like, oh, you got this wrong, this is terrible. You're operating at 62% physiological capacity. Your total health score is here. Like some of them are like, that's the dopest thing ever. And like their eyes blow up and they get a huge smile. And they're just so excited because they're like, man, I've been in the pros only at 62%. What's it going to look like when I'm at 85%? And they just see it as opportunity because it is. Others are like, I knew it. I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I just need to quit. Like I'm just never going to make it. I don't have the. So I try to be careful and cautious of how I bring that stuff on, and we'll always package it that way, right? To be like, okay, see this as an opportunity, see this as a chance. It's just difficult for some people. So to me, that's like when I think about ownership, because of the diversity of the folks that I work with, right? So on one hand, like yesterday, I'm on a phone call with a current world champion in a major American sport. I hang up that phone call, I walk right into my classroom, and I got a bunch of kids in this room who are probably having multiple families in their house. They're the first person in their family to ever go to college, etc. Like I have to be able to read the audience a little bit and to put them all in a position to succeed. So when I think about ownership, to me, I'm like, dope, like just give me opportunity to improve. This is just outstanding, right? My wife has joked for years, like every time we have these things pop up or different opportunities, and like we'll get really excited, and one of them will fall through. Most of them fall through, right? That's just the nature of things, right? They don't work out. She's just like, man, aren't you just like shattered? And I'm like, no, it's great, it's dope. Like this is just it's going to lead to something else, right? And she's just like, well, it was your fault. I'm like, yeah, it was awesome, because now I for sure know how to operate this thing again. I know how to deal with this type of interaction. It was great. I feel stoked about it. I just get super happy about failures like that. So that's my meandering on.
I love what you said though, because it all comes back to how that ownership is a learned trait. It's not something that we ultimately lean into, and ownership in a lot of ways. I know Jocko Willink has kind of made it this militant, very aggressive, in your face, harsh, kind of like you were talking about is, hey, your scores suck, this is trash, this, and versus the more empathetic ownership where it's, hey, let's take you on a learning journey here, so that knowing at the end of the day that there's a faith that everything happens for a reason, and we're going through this so that we now we can literally pull ourselves back up, dust ourselves off. We don't even have to dust ourselves off. We can own our stripes in the dirt that we've developed, but step back in the batter's box and take another swing, because there's no failure in life. There's only learning opportunity. And I think as we teach this, and as we communicate that to the diverse populations that we're working with, we leave them in a better place to ultimately succeed and reach that level of fulfillment, or whatever that purposeful success motive looks like for them.
Yeah, I mean, I just had this conversation 2 days ago with a professional athlete that I've worked very close with for many years. And this individual just experienced an extremely embarrassing professional loss. It's like one of those ones that most people will probably never get over in their career. And, the only conversation is like, yeah, that was embarrassing. Like, I'm not going to be like, well, like, no, like there's just no other way to put that than that was super embarrassing. That's probably the most embarrassing thing that'll ever happen to you in your life. Having said that, do you think you're the first person, the first athlete in this sport? No, of course not, right? So what are we going to do with that? Like, do you want to own it, or do you not? Are you done? Well, again, you think you're the first person who's had a really bad loss and thought about retirement? I was like, no, of course. Like, you would be insane. You would be literally a psychopath if you didn't think about not wanting to ever experience that kind of embarrassment ever again. Like, I would venture everyone who's ever gone through what you just went through, thought we're like, that's it, I'm done, I'm never doing this again. You're out. So what do you want to do here, right? Do you want to own those feelings? Like, we're not gonna, well, it's, like there's 1,000 excuses that were real, by the way, like 1,000 things that went wrong going into that just set the person up for failure massively. But that doesn't matter. Like, that doesn't really matter. Do you want to own the fact? And do you want to own the dream? Is what we say. Like, do you really want to own the dream? Or are you like, now things got really hard. We thought we were hard before. Now they got really, really hard. Do you still want to own the dream, or do you not? Like, this is all it comes down to. Like, this is the climax. This is the mid part of the drama of the movie. Like, this isn't the end. So yeah, and then that's what we expect to that individual. It's just like, do you want to own the dream or not?
I love it. I absolutely love it. Doc, where can people interact with you? I know you've got so many great content pieces that you put out in different platforms. Where can they interact with you? Where can they find you? Where can they hear more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, Instagram and Twitter are the best places. They both have variation in their functionality. I'll put it that way. So depending on the type of interaction you like, I pretty much only do professional things on both platforms. So if you like science and this type of stuff, Twitter is easier to direct link research and things like that. I don't change my bio every time I make a damn post on Instagram. That's annoying as hell. But those are up there as well. And then if you want, strict education, YouTube. So I've got the vast majority of the lectures from all of my classes just up on YouTube, open access. So you can basically take all my university classes for free up there.
Amazing. It's again, something I love about you is you're just continually here to serve, continually there to put quality information out in an entertaining way, and something that can truly be applied to everybody's life in a great way. So I appreciate you for that as well. Listeners, guys, team, as we move forward, it all comes down to how do we utilize information? There's massive amounts of information. There's no shortage of information of ways in which we can optimize ourselves, but it's how do we apply it? Is it right? Is it wrong? Are we questioning it? Are we asking why? Can we understand at greater depths as to how is it affecting us? And when we start to lean into that self-experimentation, we take true ownership of our own journeys and where we're going. We have to ask ourselves, what are we going to measure? What are we looking at? Are we using something quantifiable? Are we able to put it against something? What variable are we looking at? Are we making sure that it's something that isn't constantly changing, but something that is reliable? And then when we dive into that, how are we going to make sure that we can truly make it ours? And so as we lean into this, we know that everything that we do is different. Success is different. And so we have to own our different. And as we own our different, we're going to lean into something and a new territory that maybe we've never experienced before. And that can be scary, but at the end of the day, that's what leads to the life that's worth living, so that you can truly own your dream. We'll see you next week.